You know that phone call that shatters your entire world? The one where you realize everything you thought you knew was a lie? Mine started with my commanding officer telling me my 12-year-old daughter had beaten her mom's new husband unconscious at their wedding. And the wildest part? I've never been prouder. I was stationed in Germany, hadn't seen my kids in 8 agonizing months. My little girl, who used to cry for a week when our old dog passed away, was now facing felony assault charges for putting a grown man in the hospital at the altar. Can you even imagine? An 18-hour emergency flight later, my stomach in knots, I pulled up to my ex-wife's house. The groom's dark blood was still there, caked into the gravel by the front steps. My heart hammered against my ribs. I rang the doorbell, and Diane, my ex-wife, ripped it open, her face a mask of pure rage. "We're pressing charges," she hissed. I just pushed past her, my voice steely. "I'm not taking anyone's side until I hear both." The living room felt less like a home and more like a courthouse tribunal. Diane's parents stiff on the couch, her brother Russ by the fireplace, her sister Fun huddled in a corner. Then there were the groom's parents, standing like guard dogs, and in the dead center, the man himself, Wade. New husband, wire jaw, 2 black eyes, bandages wrapped around his head. He was groaning softly, pressing an ice pack to his face, milking it for all it was worth. And then I saw her. My daughter, my 12-year-old who carries spiders outside in a cup rather than step on them, who taught her little stepbrother to fold paper cranes. She sat perfectly straight, chin raised, looking me dead in the eyes. Not a shred of regret. She looked proud. "Your daughter's dangerous," Diane spat, gesturing wildly at Wade. "Look what she did to him." Wade conveniently moaned louder. "She's an animal. They're charging her as a juvenile, but they should try her as an adult." Diane's father, my daughter's grandpa, shook his head in disgust. My daughter's knuckles were split and swollen, one wrapped in a flimsy paper towel. At that moment, I saw no excuse, no way out of this. But then, I just had to know. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "what happened?" She slowly scanned the room, every accusing face, every betraying glance. Then she spoke, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the thick tension. "You want to know the truth? He's been hurting Tommy for 6 months, locking him in the dark, calls it discipline. That's why I did it." My entire world stopped. The room, however, exploded. "Liar. Ridiculous. How dare you?" Wade's eyes flicked sideways for a split second, a quick, terrified glance before he resumed his dramatic groans. Diane's mother stepped forward, her finger pointing at my daughter, a vicious snarl on her lips. "You vicious little—" But Wade's father grabbed her arm, his face suddenly ashen, like he'd been expecting this. In the midst of the chaos, my daughter calmly pulled out her phone. She swiped to a hidden folder. "He locks the bolt from the outside. He told Tommy if he cried, he'd get the belt." I saw the images over her shoulder and my stomach churned. A padlock screwed onto the outside of a child's bedroom door, bruises in the shape of fingers, a welt across a small back. Diane's hands trembled as she stared at the screen. "Those could be from anything, kids bruise," she stammered, but her voice was hollow. A script she didn't believe. Wade tried to wave a hand dismissively at the phone. "That's out of context. The boy's clumsy." He stopped, the blood draining from his face as he realized he'd just admitted he knew the boy was hurt. My daughter stood up then, her voice shaking with righteous fury. "Mom, I told you 3 months ago you said he was just being firm." Diane began to stutter. "I didn't. I thought." My daughter turned to her grandfather. "Grandpa, you laughed," her voice cracked. "Told me a firm hand never hurt anybody, made a man out of you." Grandpa's face went from angry red to sickly white. He looked at Wade, then at his granddaughter, and something in his expression crumbled. "Aunt Fen, you told me, don't be so dramatic." "Huh." Fen was backing toward the door, tears streaming, whispering, oh God, I thought it was just rules. "Uncle Russ, you said I should be grateful a man finally cared enough to set boundaries." Russ had his head in his hands. "Jesus, I didn't know he was actually." "Grandma, you said kids need discipline, and in your day you got the belt and turned out fine." Grandma collapsed onto the couch, one hand over her mouth, whispering that she didn't know. "Every single one of you," my daughter stated, her voice echoing with accusation, "told me to mind my own business." Wade's parents were having a whispered argument. His father hissed, "Not again, Patricia. You swore he'd changed." The word he'd changed, the word "en" hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. But that's not why I hit him. My daughter's words cut through the room like a knife. Everyone immediately froze. What do you mean that's not why? I asked, my blood running cold. Last night, I found Tommy locked in the pool house. He'd been there since dinner, no water. He couldn't even stand up when I got the door open. Tommy, my ex-wife's 9-year-old son, my daughter's little stepbrother. Wade's mask finally slipped completely. The boy needs structure, or he'll grow up soft. Diane grabbed his shoulders, her voice trembling. What did you just say? For the first time, real fear flashed across Wade's face. My daughter was openly crying now, ugly, gasping sobs. This morning, Mom. The morning of your wedding. I begged you. You said, not today, not in front of everyone. I knew nothing I said would stop them, so I stopped in the only way I could. She wiped her face and ran upstairs. Moments later, she came down carrying Tommy, who buried his face in her shoulder. Tommy, I asked gently, did Wade lock you up? The little boy nodded, his small body shaking. Then he pulled up his sleeve. A ring of dark bruising around his wrist where something had bound him. He turned, and there, across the back of his legs, was a fresh belt welt. Diane's mother screamed at Wade. You promised. You went to the program. You promised this would never happen again. Wade stood there, all pretense gone, his bruised face twisted in contempt. That's when my daughter spoke again, her voice strong and unwavering. We're children, and every adult in this room chose him over us. I grabbed my phone and called 911 immediately. Diane's family started begging me to stop, saying they'd drop the charges against my daughter. But I wasn't listening. Wade limped to the bathroom. I don't know what he did in there, but I didn't care. 10 minutes later, he came out just as the police were at the door. They took him for questioning. I scooped up my daughter and Tommy and drove straight to my best friend's place. 2 hours later, my phone rang. The detective's voice was serious. We need you at the station immediately. My stomach dropped. I had a sickening feeling that whatever Wade did on his phone in that bathroom had gotten me into hot water. Men like him, I was about to learn, always have a backup plan. The detective led me down a narrow hallway that reeked of old coffee and floor cleaner. He opened the door to a small room with just a metal table and 2 plastic chairs. He slid a manila folder across the table. Take a look. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside were screenshots from a phone, text messages between me and Wade, messages where I supposedly told him he could handle the kids however he needed to while I was deployed. One said I trusted his judgment completely about discipline. Another said Tommy needed firm boundaries, and I was counting on him to provide them. A third, whatever it takes to keep them in line, you have my blessing. I stared at these messages I had never, ever sent. My brain couldn't process what I was looking at. The timestamps showed they were from 3 months ago, right when my daughter first told Diane about what was happening. The detective watched my face carefully. He asked directly if I had given Wade permission to physically discipline the children. Then he asked if I had authorized confinement or corporal punishment. Absolutely not. I demanded to see my phone records to prove they were fake. He said they'd need to keep my phone for comparison and forensic analysis. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just there as a father picking up his kids anymore. They were investigating me as a possible accomplice. They took me to another room, photographed my hands, rolled each finger in ink. The technician explained they needed to rule me out as an accomplice to child endangerment. The word accomplice made my stomach churn. Wade was trying to drag me down with him, making it look like I knew and approved of what he was doing. For the next 3 hours, they peppered me with questions about my relationship with Wade, our conversations, whether I knew about his methods. Every question felt like a trap. Finally, they let me leave, but kept my phone and told me not to leave town. I walked out of that station feeling like the walls were closing in. I drove straight to the law office of Casey Maple Grove, who my friend had recommended. Casey took one look at my face and immediately cleared her schedule. She sat me down, and I poured out everything. The wedding, my daughter's revelation, these fake messages. Casey typed rapidly as I spoke. She immediately filed preservation orders with all the major phone carriers and social media companies. She explained Wade probably used spoofing apps or edited screenshots during those 10 minutes he was in the bathroom. We needed the actual phone records. She also requested Wade's search history, hoping to find how to fake text messages. Casey told me not to talk to the police again without her. Wade, she said, was clearly trying to muddy the waters to protect himself. The next morning, Curtis Oakridge from CPS showed up at my friend's house. He needed to interview both kids separately. He was gentle but thorough. My daughter recounted everything, from the first week the locks went up to the threats Wade made if they told anyone. Curtis wrote it all down, and my daughter signed each page. Then he interviewed Tommy. My brave little boy, scared but resolute, told Curtis about being locked in the dark and showed him the healing marks on his wrists and legs. Curtis photographed every bruise. Something feels really off about Wade's bathroom trip, Curtis mused. 10 minutes is a long time. And his mother's reaction, not again, the program, makes me wonder how many times this man has done this before. He arranged for a nurse practitioner to do full physical exams on both kids. After the interviews, Curtis explained the safety plan. I would have supervised contact with my own children. I'd have to meet them at the CPS office with a social worker present. It felt humiliating, but their safety was all that mattered. He assured me Wade's criminal case would move forward, regardless of the investigation into me. The kids' disclosures were credible, consistent with abuse, and the physical evidence on Tommy supported their statements. But he also warned Wade's defense attorney would try to use those fake messages to claim I was involved, or at least negligent. The fight wasn't over. The next few days crawled by, painfully slow. Casey got the phone records. They proved I never sent those messages. The metadata showed they were created on Wade's phone using a third-party app. Casey also found that Wade had searched how to fake text messages for court and spoofing apps that look real on his laptop the week before the wedding. The police detective called Casey. They were no longer considering me a suspect, but a key witness. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, quickly followed by a fresh wave of dread. My phone rang while I was still in the parking lot. A military number. Chandler Burgrove from JAG was on the line. My security clearance was under review due to the ongoing investigation. My emergency leave was extended, but I was placed on administrative hold. I couldn't return to duty until this mess was cleared up. I sat in my car feeling my entire career falling apart, just when my kids needed me most. Casey called right after. She'd gotten copies of those fake screenshots. She noticed the font was wrong from my phone model, the timestamp formatting didn't match, and some messages had different spacing. She'd already called Corey Sedlin, a digital forensics expert, to examine everything properly. Meanwhile, Devin Pinehire from Victim Services arranged for Tommy's medical exam at the Children's Hospital. I drove him there myself, but they made me wait in the hallway. Tommy looked so small, walking in there with just the nurse and doctor. I paced for 3 hours, checking my phone every few minutes. The nurse brought him juice boxes twice, and each time I caught a glimpse of him sitting on the exam table in a hospital gown. When they finally finished, Tommy came out holding a stuffed bear they'd given him, refusing to look me in the eyes. Devin walked out with a thick folder. Evidence consistent with his disclosure, she said. Healing fractures in 2 fingers, old bruising in different stages, signs of dehydration and malnourishment. My phone started buzzing with voicemails from Diane, losing her mind about not being able to take Tommy home. The safety plan now required all visits to be supervised. She screamed into my voicemail, blaming me for everything. First message, I turned our daughter against Wade. Second, Wade was a monster. Third, our daughter ruined her wedding. Fourth, I didn't warn her about Wade, even though I'd been on the other side of the world. Her parents called too, but I deleted those without listening. Wade posted bail that same day, using his parents' money. Within hours, his lawyer filed a restraining order against me. The paperwork claimed I'd orchestrated the whole situation to steal custody and coach my daughter to attack him. He was painting himself as the victim of a jealous ex-husband scheme. Textbook abuser behavior, Casey said, trying to flip the narrative. The next morning was my daughter's CPS interview at the Children's Advocacy Center. She sat in that little room with the cameras and told Curtis everything in painstaking detail. Exact dates when she told her mom about the locks 3 months ago. The specific words her grandfather used when he laughed it off. What her aunt was wearing the day she told her not to be dramatic. Even what was on TV when her uncle said she should be grateful. Curtis wrote it all down, creating an official timeline of every adult who'd been told and failed to act. The safety plan now meant both kids had to stay at my friend's house with me. We set up a strange routine. I'd arrive at 7 a.m. to get them ready for school, leave when they got on the bus, and come back at 3 p.m. I had to leave again at 8 p.m. every night, which absolutely killed me because that's when Tommy had the worst nightmares. My friend would text me updates about him crying for me, but I wasn't allowed back until morning. We lived like this for weeks, waiting for court dates and investigations to inch forward. Then an email came from Tommy's school counselor that made me sick to my stomach. She'd pulled his records going back a year and found clear changes starting 6 months ago, right when Wade moved in. His grades dropped from A's to C's. He'd gone from never missing school to having 14 absences. His teacher noted he'd become withdrawn and flinched when adults raised their hands. Another teacher wrote he'd started falling asleep at his desk and hoarding food in his backpack. The counselor had even called Diane about it, but she dismissed it, saying Tommy was just adjusting to a new stepdad. All these warning signs documented and ignored while that man was hurting him. Casey forwarded me another development. The detective called her about finding a voice memo on Wade's phone. It was supposedly me threatening to ruin his life if he married Diane. The detective warned it sounded pretty convincing. Casey immediately demanded the original file, not just a copy, for Corey to examine properly. Corey got to work. He pulled up the metadata first. The file had been created just 2 days before the wedding. The wave patterns showed weird inconsistencies, background noise suddenly changing. He isolated different layers of the audio and found evidence of voice slicing, words cut from different sources and pasted together. The modulation patterns didn't match natural speech, and there were digital artifacts showing AI voice generation markers. Corey could prove in court that this audio was completely fabricated using at least 3 different source recordings and an AI voice tool. He noted the source clips looked pulled from old voicemails I'd left Diane years ago about pickup times for the kids. Casey immediately filed the evidence with the court. Every single day felt like a month while we waited. I couldn't sleep, knowing Wade was still out there spreading lies about me. Casey kept reminding me that building a solid case takes time, but I was going crazy watching my life fall apart. 2 days into the wait, Casey forwarded me an email marked confidential from Wade's father. He admitted Wade had an incident with a nephew 5 years ago. The family had moved states afterward. He wanted immunity before giving us more details. Casey said we'd need the prosecutor's approval for any immunity deal, which could take weeks. The restraining order hearing came up first. I thought we'd finally get some protection. Casey argued I'd never threatened Wade. I was only there to protect my kids. The judge barely looked at our evidence before issuing mutual no-contact orders. He said, given the serious allegations on both sides, he was being cautious. I wanted to scream that being cautious meant protecting children, not the man who hurt them. Meanwhile, Tommy had his follow-up exam at the children's hospital. The doctor found injuries consistent with restraint and impact, but used such careful medical language it made me sick. Findings suggestive of inflicted trauma, patterned bruising consistent with reported mechanism. Why couldn't they just say what we all knew? The report would help our case, but it felt like nobody wanted to say the actual words. Then, Casey got a call from a police officer who'd been reviewing body camera footage from the wedding. He'd found audio of Wade talking to his mother after my daughter hit him. In the recording, Wade was saying, "Those photos shouldn't matter. The boy bruises easy," before his mother shushed him. Casey immediately requested a copy and filed it as evidence in both cases. She explained her strategy, defend me from the false accusations while keeping my daughter's assault case completely separate. 2 different legal tracks meant double the work, double the cost. She warned me this would be expensive and exhausting. But we had no choice. I'd already spent $8,000, and we were just getting started. That same week, I got formal notice from my military command. My security clearance was suspended pending the investigation outcome. Even if I was completely cleared, this would end any chance of promotion. 15 years of perfect service, threatened by one lying man. My commanding officer called personally to say he believed me, but his hands were tied. Protocol required suspension for any accusation involving the endangerment of minors, regardless of evidence. I'd gone from training soldiers in Germany to sitting in my friend's living room, unable to work. Corey had finished his full analysis of the fake voice memo, Wade's father suddenly having information about an old incident but wanting immunity first. The timing felt awfully convenient. Corey found proof the audio was created using at least 3 different recordings spliced together. The digital artifacts showed clear evidence of AI voice generation software. The creation timestamp in the file's metadata was 2 days after Wade claimed I'd left the message. Corey wrote up a detailed technical report that Casey said would demolish their evidence in court. But courts moved slowly, and every day that passed was another day my kids suffered. CPS started their evaluation process for Tommy's placement. Since Diane's parents had minimized the abuse, the caseworker interviewed family members to see if any relatives could provide a safe home. She mentioned they might need to consider therapeutic foster care if no family placement was appropriate. The thought of Tommy going to strangers made me physically sick. Diane's sister called saying she'd take Tommy, but only if I admitted I was lying. Her brother said the same thing. They all wanted me to confess to making everything up before they'd help. The CBS workers said their conditional offers showed they weren't suitable placements. 3 weeks into this nightmare, Diane showed up at my friend's house demanding Tommy. My friend Nadia saw her pull up and immediately called the police while locking the doors. I grabbed my phone and started recording video from inside the living room window. Diane was pounding on the door, screaming that Tommy was her son, that the safety plan was illegal and she had parental rights. Tommy was hiding in the bedroom closet crying, and my daughter was trying to comfort him. The police arrived within 10 minutes, but Diane had already kicked the front door hard enough to crack the frame. They made her leave, but said without a restraining order. They couldn't arrest her. Nadia had to pay for a new door and install security cameras that same day. Casey filed emergency paperwork for a protective order, but the judge wouldn't hear it for another week. Every night we'd hear cars slow down outside and wonder if it was Diane coming back. Tommy started wetting the bed, having nightmares about Wade coming to get him. My daughter stopped eating properly and lost 10 pounds in 3 weeks. The stress was destroying both kids while the legal system moved at a snail's pace. Casey kept saying we were building a strong case, but I could see my children falling apart. The phone records finally came back, showing Wade had never received any calls from my number. But his lawyer argued that didn't prove anything, since I could have used a different phone. The prosecutor called a meeting 2 days later at the courthouse, laying out my daughter's options while Casey sat next to us taking notes. He pushed papers across the table showing the assault charges could mean juvenile detention, but mentioned something called a diversion program. Casey leaned forward, talking about counseling alternatives while my daughter sat there silent and pale. The prosecutor kept checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be. Casey pushed for therapy instead of any formal charges. After 40 minutes of back and forth, they agreed to consider it if my daughter completed a written statement about everything. That night, my daughter sat at the kitchen table for 4 hours, writing page after page about what Wade did to Tommy and to her. Her hand cramped up twice. I made her hot chocolate, but she didn't touch it. When she finally finished, she had 11 pages, front and back, describing every single thing he'd done. She wrote about how the locks went up one door at a time over the first month. She wrote about the cold showers he made Tommy take as punishment, the meals he withheld, the hours kneeling on rice in the corner. She wrote about how he'd taken her phone, read her messages, and threatened to lock her out in the cold if she told anyone. She wrote about catching him standing over Tommy with the belt, and how she knew the wedding was her only chance to stop him in front of witnesses. Reading it made me throw up twice in the bathroom while she slept, exhausted on the couch. The next morning, we drove Tommy to the Children's Advocacy Center for his interview. The building looked like a regular house from outside, with toys in the waiting room and bright paintings on the walls. They took Tommy back to a special room with cameras while I sat in the lobby watching other parents stare at their phones. The interviewer was trained to talk to kids about abuse without making it worse for them. I could hear Tommy crying through the door, even though they said it was soundproof. After 2 hours, they brought him out, and he wouldn't look at me. The interviewer pulled Casey aside and showed her the preliminary report on her tablet. The control pattern started 6 months ago with small rules that got harsher each week. Wade had told Tommy it was their secret and that bad things would happen if he told. The report documented bruising in multiple stages of healing and the behavioral changes his teachers had noticed. Casey said this report alone would strengthen the criminal case significantly. That afternoon, the detective called me into his office and warned me about talking to Diane's family. He said any coordination between witnesses could look like tampering, even if we were just checking on each other. Casey told me all communication had to go through her office from now on. 2 days later, Casey got a judge to sign an order for complete forensic imaging of Wade's phone. The tech team would recover deleted files and hidden apps to find the real source of those fake messages. Wade's lawyer fought it for a week, claiming it violated his privacy. But the judge sided with us. The phone company finally sent over the complete records, showing every call and text from my phone for the past year. Casey spread them out on her conference table, highlighting the relevant dates. 0 messages to Wade's number during any of the time he claimed I'd threatened him. Casey called it our first solid piece of evidence that he was lying about the threats. She filed it with the court that same afternoon, while I sat in her office eating stale crackers from the vending machine. Corey called Casey's office the next morning with big news about Wade's phone. He'd found a spoofing app hidden in a calculator folder that was installed at 11:47 p.m. the night of the wedding, matching exactly when Wade locked himself in the bathroom after we called the police. The app could fake messages from any phone number and make them look real in screenshots. Corey sent over the technical report showing the installation timestamp and app history. Casey immediately forwarded everything to the prosecutor, who called back within an hour. He said he was becoming less interested in pursuing any charges against me, given the mounting evidence, but he wouldn't formally close the investigation yet. Casey said this was typical hedging and not to worry about it. But I couldn't sleep anyway. 3 days later, my phone started blowing up with notifications from numbers I didn't recognize. Someone had leaked details about the case online, posting my name and photo on social media. The messages started nice enough, people saying they supported me, but quickly turned dark. Death threats filled my voicemail within hours. People found my work email and sent graphic descriptions of what they wanted to do to me. Someone posted my friend's address where we were staying and said they were coming to burn it down. Casey helped me screenshot everything and file police reports while we installed security cameras at my friend's house. The harassment got so bad, I had to change my phone number twice in 1 week. My friend's kids were scared to go to school because cars kept driving slowly past the house taking pictures. Casey hired a private security company to patrol the neighborhood and escort us to court appearances. The online mob had decided I was guilty without knowing any facts about the case. 3 days later, a letter showed up from Fen with shaky handwriting, saying she was sorry for not believing my daughter. Russ sent a text saying he wasn't picking sides but needed space from the whole situation. Diane's parents completely stopped answering calls or messages, like we didn't exist anymore. The family was splitting apart, with everyone choosing their own way to handle the guilt. CPS came to my friend's house that week with paperwork about Tommy's placement. They said he needed to stay in therapeutic foster care, and my friend's family qualified since they had the right training. Tommy would get to stay where he felt safe while getting help for what happened to him. The social worker brought toys and books to help him feel more at home. My friend's kids were being really gentle with him, teaching him card games. 2 weeks passed before Wade's lawyer filed papers trying to get my daughter's photos and videos thrown out as evidence. He claimed they were illegally obtained. The motion meant my daughter might have to testify about how she got the footage. Casey immediately started preparing counterarguments. The hearing was scheduled for the following month. Meanwhile, my daughter had to go to juvenile court for the assault charges. The judge looked at all the evidence and offered her a diversion program instead of regular prosecution. She'd have to do therapy twice a week and 60 hours of community service at the animal shelter. If she completed everything successfully, her record would stay clean. My daughter nodded and signed the papers without saying anything. The military called me that same week about an administrative board hearing. They said the negative publicity from the case was affecting unit morale and base security. My security clearance was under review, and they were questioning my humanitarian leave status. I had to submit pages of documentation explaining everything that happened. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out, with my career hanging in the balance. During the suppression hearing, the judge kept asking Wade's lawyer to explain the technical problems with his phone evidence against me. Corey had found timestamps that didn't match. Metadata showing files were created after he went to the bathroom. The lawyer kept stumbling over his words, trying to explain the inconsistencies. The judge frowned and took notes while Wade sat there, looking nervous. His bruises had faded, but he kept touching his jaw like it still hurt. After 3 hours of testimony, the judge said he'd rule within 2 weeks. CPS finished their investigation and officially found that Wade had abused both kids. They also found Diane guilty of failure to protect her children from a known threat. She was mandated to take parenting classes every week for 6 months. The safety plan got extended another 6 months, with surprise home visits included. Diane started showing up to the required classes without complaining. She sat in the back, taking notes and asking questions about warning signs she'd missed. Her anger was shifting away from us and toward Wade. As more evidence came out, she started sending short emails asking how Tommy was doing. One morning, I woke up to dozens of Facebook messages from accounts I didn't recognize. They were all saying horrible things about me and my daughter, but using details only Wade would know. Casey documented every single message and tracked the IP addresses back to Wade's apartment building. We filed contempt charges since he was violating the no contact order through fake accounts. The judge scheduled an emergency hearing about possibly revoking his bail. Wade showed up with a different lawyer who argued he couldn't control what strangers posted. But Casey had proof he'd been logged into the fake accounts himself. My daughter started trauma therapy but wouldn't talk for the first 3 sessions. She just sat there drawing pictures of birds and trees while the therapist waited patiently. On the 4th session, she finally said one sentence about feeling like she should have stopped it sooner. The therapist gave her a small, smooth stone to hold when the guilt got too heavy. Week by week, she started saying a few more words about what happened. Sometimes she'd stop mid-sentence and go back to drawing birds. The therapist said this was normal, and healing would take time. Tommy was doing better in his therapy, using a dollhouse to show what happened. His therapist was documenting everything for the criminal case. My friend's family was being amazing with him, and he'd started smiling again sometimes. The military board reviewed all my documents and testimony from Casey about the false allegations. They decided to extend my humanitarian leave, but put me on administrative duty when I returned. My security clearance stayed intact but would be reviewed again in 6 months. Diane's parents finally sent one email saying they needed time to process everything. They admitted they should have listened when my daughter first spoke up. Russ started texting again, asking if the kids needed anything, then sent gift cards for clothes and toys, but still couldn't face us in person. The family was slowly trying to figure out how to move forward with all this guilt. The school called me 3 days later about setting up my daughter's return. We sat in a conference room with the principal, 2 counselors, and the special education coordinator. They kept using words like trauma-informed approach and modified schedule. While I filled out stacks of paperwork, my daughter would start with half days and work up to full-time over 6 weeks. A counselor would check on her every morning and afternoon. She'd get extra time for tests and could leave class if she felt overwhelmed. The principal assured me they'd keep everything confidential, but I knew how schools worked. By the time we left, I could already see teachers whispering in the hallway. That same afternoon, I checked my email and saw the promotion list had posted. I scrolled through 15 years' worth of peers getting their names on there. Mine wasn't anywhere. My commanding officer had warned me this would happen, but seeing it made my chest tight. All those deployments, all those perfect evaluations, gone because of one incident that wasn't even my fault. I closed my laptop and tried not to think about the retirement points I'd never earned. Now, 2 days later, a certified letter arrived from Wade's family's lawyer. They wanted us to sign NDAs or face a defamation lawsuit for $2 million. The letter claimed we destroyed Wade's reputation with false accusations. I immediately called Casey and read it to her. She just laughed. "They're scared," she said. "This is desperation." Casey met me at a coffee shop that afternoon with a stack of her own papers. She'd already pulled Wade's arrest record and the CPS reports. "We're not signing anything that silences these kids," she said, highlighting sections of their proposed agreement. "Look at this clause. They want the kids to never speak about the abuse, even in therapy." She crossed out entire pages with a red pen. Over the next week, Casey went back and forth with their lawyers. They offered us $50,000 to drop everything, then $100,000, then $200,000. Each time, Casey told them the same thing. "My clients want justice, not money." Their lawyer got nasty, threatening to bury us in legal fees. Casey didn't even blink. "Try it. I work on contingency for abuse cases." She slid a counterproposal across the table. Criminal prosecution goes forward. No NDAs. No money changes hands. The lawyer's face went red, but he took the papers. Meanwhile, the prosecutor called with news about Wade's case. He'd been offered 18 months if he pleads to misdemeanor child endangerment. My stomach dropped. Misdemeanor? He tortured 2 children. The prosecutor sounded tired. His attorney is good. They're claiming the injuries are circumstantial and the discipline was within a parent's rights. He explained how Wade's lawyer was filing motion after motion to get evidence thrown out. They wanted my daughter's photos excluded as illegally obtained. They claimed Tommy's statements were coached. Every delay tactic in the book. "We're looking at trial in 8 months minimum," he said. The courts were backed up. 8 months of waiting, of legal bills piling up, of my kids having to relive this over and over. That night, around 11, my phone rang. Tommy's small voice came through. "I can't sleep. He's in my dreams." I could hear him crying. I walked him through the breathing exercises his therapist taught him. In for 4, hold for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. We did it together for 10 minutes until his breathing steadied. Diane got on the phone briefly. "This happens every night now," she said. "He won't sleep with the light off." I called Tommy's therapist first thing in the morning for an emergency session. She fit him in that afternoon. 3 weeks passed before my daughter's juvenile court date arrived. The judge reviewed her therapy attendance records and the reports from her counselor. My daughter had shown up to every single session. The judge approved her diversion program with conditions: 100 hours of community service at the animal shelter, weekly therapy for a year, monthly check-ins with a probation officer, and no contact with Wade or his family. My daughter nodded at each requirement. The judge reminded her this was her chance to avoid a permanent record. We started the community service that weekend, watching my daughter clean kennels and walk dogs. You'd never know what she'd been through. The animals loved her immediately. Casey called the next morning with good news. I filed a motion to get Wade's previous records. Wade's family fought it hard, claiming privacy rights, but Casey had found a precedent about pattern behavior in abuse cases. The judge sided with us. The records from his time in Michigan are being sent over. Casey's voice had an edge of excitement. There might be other victims. We'll know within 2 weeks what those records contained. That same day, I got called into my commander's office. The formal reprimand was waiting on his desk. Conduct unbecoming for the negative attention brought to the unit. It was the lightest punishment possible, but it still felt like a punch. My commander looked uncomfortable as I signed it. "I fought for you," he said. This was the best I could do. The reprimand would stay in my file forever. Any board that reviewed my record would see it. My military career had effectively ended, even if I could stay in. I walked out of his office knowing I'd never make rank again. Diane started therapy 3 weeks later as part of her custody agreement with CPS. I got the report copy from my lawyer showing what she told her therapist. She sat in the office admitting she'd noticed Wade getting too harsh with the kids months before the wedding. She'd seen him grab Tommy's arm too hard and lock doors that were never locked before. The therapist wrote down every word and sent it straight to CPS as required by her treatment plan. Wade's parents showed up at my lawyer's office the next week with their own attorney and a check. They wanted to settle Tommy's civil claim quietly, without any court filing that would make headlines. The settlement papers guaranteed Tommy would have therapy paid through age 21, with no limits on sessions. Their lawyer made us sign papers saying we couldn't talk about the money to anyone, ever. My daughter went back to school with a safety plan the counselor helped us write. Kids whispered when she walked down the halls, and some moved away from her at lunch. We practiced breathing exercises in the car before school, but some mornings she just sat there shaking. I'd have to call her in sick, and we'd try again the next day. Tommy's foster family sent updates through CPS saying he was doing better each week. He needed therapy twice a week and still had nightmares, but they were committed to keeping him. They told the social worker they'd adopt him if Diane's rights got terminated completely. My daughter started her second placement of community service at the domestic violence shelter downtown. She helped sort donations and clean the playroom where kids stayed while their parents met with counselors. The coordinator said working there seemed to help her understand she wasn't alone in what happened. Other kids had been hurt too, and seeing them heal helped her believe she could heal. Then Casey called, and her voice was different, vibrating with an urgent energy. "The Michigan records are here. The prosecutor wants us in his office in an hour." We sat across from him while he laid 3 separate files on the desk. 3 children before Tommy. A nephew. A foster placement Wade had lasted 4 months in before the agency pulled the kids. A neighbor's son. Every one of them had told an adult. Every one of those reports had been buried, withdrawn, or smoothed over by a family that kept moving him to a new state. The prosecutor closed the misdemeanor offer that afternoon and refiled. Felony abuse and unlawful restraint. 2 counts for my kids. Plus, the prior reports reopened as a pattern. He told us Wade was now looking at decades, not months. Then he asked my daughter if she wanted to add a statement to the file. She thought about it, her gaze distant, then looked him dead in the eye and said just one line: "Tell them I'd do it again." People still ask me how a father could be proud his little girl put a grown man in the hospital. They have it backwards. I'm not proud. She hit him. I'm proud she had the courage, the fierce, unwavering love for her brother, to be the only one who stood up against a monster when every adult around her failed. What would you have done if you were in my daughter's shoes, knowing you were the last line of defense for someone you loved? Have you ever had to fight a system that felt like it was rigged against you and your kids? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to hear your stories.